I spent 16 days in South America as an aspiring Spanish speaker. Did it make me any better? Let's talk about it.
No, muchísimo como Perú. Ha sido increíble en Perú, de verdad. Universitarios que quieren estudiar en el extranjero.
I hiked, I toured, I clubbed, I spoke a lot of Spanish. Part travel vlog, part tracking my progress in Spanish. Here's what my time in Chile and Peru looked like. So I started my trip in Santiago, Chile for work. Luckily, a lot of what I was doing was out and about, so it wasn't like I was cooped up in a conference room for the whole week.
I thought I'd just share some of my first impressions of Santiago. It is such a cool city. Lots of young people, very alternative styles I'm seeing. Also, the mall here, still a very big deal.
I didn't think I'd have a lot of opportunity to use my Spanish on this part of the trip because I was with an English-speaking group, but I did get some chances to speak Spanish. I had some quick encounters at drugstores, at restaurants, on tours, and I noticed that when I spoke Spanish, people weren't switching to English to speak with me, which was a great sign and had me feeling really confident. It meant that my Spanish wasn't holding up the interaction anyway, making things go slower. The one time I did have someone switch to English with me was when I was checking into my hotel at 8 a.m. after 12 hours of traveling. No words were working for me at that point in time, not in English, not in Spanish. My brain was just completely dead and I wanted to sleep so badly. So I'll give myself a pass for that one. I had very low expectations for how well I was going to be able to understand Chilean Spanish, but it wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be. And that's not because Chilean Spanish isn't hard, it is, but I think Chileans are so aware that their Spanish is so different from the rest of Latin America that when they're speaking with a foreigner and they know they're speaking with a foreigner like me, they'll kind of code switch and use more standard Spanish. They'll speak a bit slower, they'll speak a bit clearer, they'll use less Chilenismos like Chilean slang, and they'll actually pronounce their S's. Se comen todos los S's, no dicen. This made it really hard to eavesdrop, admittedly, but I'm not supposed to be doing that anyway, so it doesn't matter. Overall, great destination. I'd give it a 7 out of 10. I'd even say it's maybe a better place to live than to visit. There aren't so many things to go see and do. It's just a nice place to be, a nice place to live. I also think as a US American, Chile is a really important destination to visit because we were involved in their history in a not so great way. And I think it's important to hear from their perspective, what they experienced at the hands of our government, and not just from the American perspective. After my week of working in Santiago, it was finally time for vacation in Peru and I could not wait. First of all, flying into Cusco was the most spectacular view I have ever gotten from a plane in my life. I ordered a taxi to take me from the Cusco airport to Ollantaytambo and I was so lucky to have the kindest taxi driver and we talked non-stop for all 5 hours of this journey.
Siento bastante segura allá. Depende del área, pero no es tan común. Pues ese tipo de crimen. Hay otro tipo de crimen que
No es tan peligroso.
no, pues en otras maneras es peligroso.
I was tired, it was late, there was so much traffic, and Valentin, the taxi driver, kept saying that I could go to sleep if I wanted it and reassuring me that I did not have to talk to him for the whole ride. But I was having such a fun time talking and I wanted to see how far I could take it, so we ended up talking the entire time.
¿Has cambiado del trabajo mucho?
No, yo era chef.
¿Y todavía cocinas?
Sí, cuando hay eventos o me llaman.
Pero ¿por qué no eres chef como de trabajo ahora? ¿Es que el dinero es mejor, el sueldo es mejor?
Como que trabajas 9, 10 horas, estás todo
Sí.
parado.
My Spanish is better than his English, so that just ended up being our shared language. The topics that we were able to discuss were just dependent on how comfortable I felt discussing those things in Spanish. And for really maybe the first time in any of my trips, I didn't really feel like my Spanish kept us from discussing anything that I wanted to discuss over hours and hours and hours, which was a really, really good feeling. There also weren't many times where I had to ask him to clarify himself or repeat himself or simplify what he was saying. It just felt like a regular conversation between friends. Granted, he had to deal with me umming and awing a lot and correcting myself.
¿Dividieron? ¿Tiene sentido?
We were communicating, and that's what the point of all this is. Once I settled into my hostel in Ollantaytambo, I realized that there weren't that many other travelers there. So that meant I had no one to speak English with. The next 3.5 days were full on Spanish. I had no in-person English interaction for 3.5 days. I was speaking Spanish with everyone, and thankfully no one switched to English. I even became friends with one of the waiters at a restaurant that I frequented.
Backstreet Boy?
Oh, ok. Muy de los 2000.
2000, no. Backstreet Boy.
O antes, los 90. Es un poco antes de mi época.
Yo lo escucho porque
Porque tienes
sí,
tus hermanos mayores.
Ajá.
¿Te gusta Juanes? ¿Te gusta?
Juanes.
Me encanta.
Tengo la
Juanes.
camisa.
Sí, porque eso fue la primera canción en español que aprendí de verdad, como aprendí las letras.
¿Sí?
Sí, me encanta la canción que se ponen en los antros, ella y yo.
Eso es
¿sabes?
como Marco. Yo de niño la actuaba.
Oh, sí. Uno de los peores. Él no puede cantar para nada.
Sí.
Y sin sus vocales
arreglos.
al fondo, es una lástima.
Sí.
I was having fun, but by day 3, I just wanted to speak my native language. Something I noticed on this trip that was a bit new for me is that I wasn't getting tired of speaking Spanish while in conversation. I think previously on other trips, after about an hour, I would actually get tired and I felt like I would have to speak English or I would just kind of go silent. That wasn't happening this time around. Spanish wasn't giving me a headache or anything. What was pretty fatiguing though was that I felt like there was a part of my personality that I couldn't fully express in Spanish, and that was hard for me. I think this feeling is definitely something that's going to have to change before I say I really feel fluent or bilingual in Spanish. I want to feel like my full self when I'm speaking. Then it was time for another drive with my friend Valentine from Ollantaytambo back to Cusco. We had about 3.5 hours together this time and were able to get into some deeper topics.
Es decir, no puedes garantizar una relación buena entre hermanos. Es algo muy bonita, pienso, las relaciones que tienen, pero al mismo tiempo no siento que me falta nada sin hermanos.
I wasn't perfect, but I felt like I was able to express myself and my feelings accurately, and Valentine was super duper patient with me.
Racistas con los de acá de la sierra, pues. Serranos, algo así, ¿no?
La gente latina es un poco racista, más que un poco.
He spoke really clearly, so there weren't a lot of times where I had to ask him to slow down or repeat himself. And he also helped me a lot trying to find the right words to describe what I wanted to say.
Pensar en creer o crear. Mis ideas se convirtieron, se cambiaron.
I even took some time trying to explain to him why the subjunctive was so hard.
Porque estamos hablando de un futuro que no existe. Es bien difícil. Y no existe, pero la gramática no cambia tanto. ¿Puedes ver? Como extranjero es un poco difícil de entender. Es más difícil aprender cosas que no existen en su propia lengua.
Once I got to Cusco, I went on some tours and I did them in Spanish. I'd say my comprehension was around 75%. There were a lot of distractions. I was in a big group, lots of new vocabulary and topics that I'm not that familiar with, but I was proud of myself for pushing through and challenging myself. I did notice that my recall of some of the facts that I learned was a bit lower than what it would have been if I had gone on the tour in English. So things that I know I understood, I just feel like there were some gaps when I tried to explain it later to someone in English. Let me know if you've ever experienced something similar with a language that you're learning. I also attended a language exchange at my hostel, which was really fun. It was about 10 minutes in English, 10 minutes in Spanish for an hour and 20 minutes. After introducing myself to my first partner, he very enthusiastically complimented my Spanish, and when he asked me where I was from and I told him the US, he was really shocked. This actually happened to me a few times when I was speaking to someone in Spanish. They'd ask me where I was from, I tell them the US, and they either wouldn't believe me or think I had family from Latin America or something like that. And I'm not saying this because I think my Spanish is so great or to pat myself on the back. I think that Spanish speakers are just so tired of the gringo accent that when they meet someone from the US that even tries to mimic the sounds of Spanish, it's very impressive to them. I don't think your accent needs to be perfect. That is not a requirement to do well in a language. I think just trying makes such a big difference and just shows respect for someone's language. Hay demasiados estadounidenses que piensan que la única manera de pronunciar algo es en la manera americano, y no es cierto, okay? I was really flattered by the compliments to my Spanish. I feel like I got more on this trip than ones in the past, and I think in large part that just came about from me feeling more comfortable in the language than I had previously and just having a bit more vocabulary to express myself. My next goal is to be so good at Spanish that people don't even think to compliment me because I'm undetectable as a learner. Eventually, my time in Cusco had to come to an end, and I was really sad to leave. I felt so at home and welcome there.
Puedo quedarme aquí por un mes, quizá.
But I was excited to get out of the cold mountains and head to coastal, warm Lima. Lima was my final stop, and I was kind of nervous that since it was a big city, there would be more people that would switch to English and not really give me a chance to practice my Spanish, but it didn't happen. This was another few days where I was speaking all Spanish all the time, except for a couple exceptions. I joined a huge free walking tour of the city, and when it was time to split up the group into English and Spanish speakers, I noticed that the Spanish group was way smaller, so I used my Spanish speaking privilege and bopped over to that group because that's just something I can do now. If you're at least an intermediate level, I would definitely recommend you trying a Spanish tour when you're traveling. It's a great way to get input, meet other Spanish speakers, and just challenge yourself to get input in a different way. I do want to add a couple fun Spanish conversation anecdotes from my time in Lima. I was talking to two girls from Latin America at my hostel, and we were all speaking in Spanish, and they asked me where I was from. I said the US. They were very surprised, and they told me that my accent sounded Central American. I don't know where that came from. I don't think I listened to a lot of Central American input, and I don't know anyone from Central America really, but I guess that just means I sound neutral. I'll take it. I love it. Also, at the same hostel, I met a Brazilian guy who had about the same level of Spanish as me and like kind of a bit lower level of English. And for about an hour and a half, we were just speaking this fun mix of Portuguese, Spanish, and English. And a couple times I stepped back mentally in the conversation. I was like, I'm really doing this right now. Like, I'm just having a conversation in 3 languages. Unfortunately, like all trips do, this one came to an end and it was time to leave Peru. I was not ready, but I know that I'm definitely going to be going back to Peru. It was a strong 9 out of 10 for me. I want to revisit. I want to spend a lot of time there. I'd be open to living there. Now, do I feel like this trip helped with my Spanish? Yes and no. So when I'm home, the kind of studying that I'm doing is really building blocks of the language. I'm really working on my grammar. I'm really working on my vocabulary. And then when I travel, it's really an opportunity to practice my fluidity, how quickly things come to my head, how quickly I can comprehend things in a conversation, just really practicing my stamina in Spanish. And in that sense, this trip really did help me progress. This was the first time I really pushed the boundaries of how much Spanish I can speak at a time. And I proved to myself that Spanish doesn't really make me tired anymore. Sometimes studying makes me tired, but just having a regular conversation with people, I can do that for hours. And this trip really proved that to me. Oddly enough, even after hours and hours of speaking Spanish pretty comfortably on this trip, I noticed I mess up the most in really simple transactions like checking into a hotel or getting food from a restaurant. Thinking back now on how successful or unsuccessful my communication was, I'm realizing that my comfort with the situation or my familiarization with the person really could have made a big difference in how well I was able to get my point across. I'm thinking now that when I was in an unfamiliar environment or I thought I might have been judged for my bad Spanish and someone might have spoken English and they were just waiting for me to mess up, those were the times where I was tripping up on my words more and just more nervous to speak. I think that just comes with being a learner, having some of those variables impact your communication. But I think, or at least I hope, that as we progress that those factors matter less and less because our base is so solid that whatever's happening on the outside won't impact how well we use the language. The amount of progress I made in a little over 2 weeks, if I were to be able to multiply that, I think I could really reach the level of fluency I want in a year. But unfortunately, that's not possible with my lifestyle right now. So I'm gonna take these little opportunities of 1 week here, 3 weeks here, and try and get as much as I can out of them. Overall, my Spanish did not feel like a burden on this trip. It made transactions go smoother rather than hold them up. I was able to clarify things for English speakers that didn't speak Spanish, or vice versa. When a Spanish speaker was trying to translate something to an English speaker and didn't have the words for it, I was able to help with that. And I felt more like myself than I ever have in Spanish. My interactions, everything I experienced on my trips is a lot more memorable than my day-to-day studying. And when I get to think back on them, I actually see the progress I'm making in a way that I can't really see when I think about my time studying alone. So obviously I'm not at 100%, I'm not completely bilingual, you guys saw the clips, but I've made progress. I know there's people that in the time I've been learning Spanish have already reached a way higher level than me, but I'm really happy with how far I've come and I'm excited to see how much further I can push my abilities in the language. But that's my trip, 16 days, Chile, Peru. Let me know down in the comments what you guys thought of the trip, any feedback you have for my speaking samples. I know they're not perfect, so if you have any corrections, just let me know nicely in the comments. And if you like these types of videos with a mix of travel and language, sit tight because I'm going to Spain next month. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you want to see that and all things related to my journey to fluency in Spanish. I'll talk to you guys later. Adios!